A ruthless biker gang leader brutally attacked a 99-year-old World War II hero in broad daylight, not realizing they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They were about to learn the hard way that this veteran's son commanded one of the most elite federal task forces in the country. Within days, their entire criminal empire would come crashing down, and they would discover why you never underestimate a man who survived the bloodiest battles of the Pacific. Harold Mitchell sat alone at his favorite window table in Ruby's coffee house, his weathered hands carefully arranging his morning ritual. 2 sugar cubes, a splash of cream, and the day's crossword puzzle. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting a warm glow on his distinguished service cross pin, carefully attached to his worn navy blue vest. At 99 years old, Harold had earned his peaceful mornings, though the memories of war still visited him in quiet moments. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The aroma of freshly baked cinnamon rolls and percolating coffee filled the air as Sarah, the young owner who had inherited the place from her grandmother, made her morning rounds. Her red hair was tied back in a messy bun, and dark circles under her eyes hinted at another late night doing the books. The coffee house itself was a testament to small-town persistence, its brick walls having witnessed over 60 years of Cedar Grove's history. "The usual breakfast, Mr. Mitchell?" Sarah asked, already knowing the answer. She had been serving him the same meal, 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, and extra crispy bacon, every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 5 years. The routine was as much a comfort to her as it was to him. "You know me too well, dear," Harold smiled, his clear blue eyes twinkling beneath his silver brows. He unfolded the newspaper with practiced care, smoothing out the creases just as he had done every morning since returning from the Pacific in '45. The familiar motion brought back memories of reading about the surrender on the USS Missouri, standing on deck as history unfolded around him. The coffee house had become his sanctuary after his wife Margaret passed 3 years ago. The routine, the familiar faces, the gentle buzz of conversation. It helped fill the silence of his empty house. Besides, Sarah reminded him of Margaret when she was young, that same determined spirit behind a gentle smile. He often caught himself wanting to tell her stories about Margaret's own determination during the war years, running the family hardware store while he was overseas. "Business been okay?" Harold asked, noticing the worry lines around Sarah's eyes and the way she kept glancing at the street outside. The question seemed to weigh on her more than usual this morning. She hesitated, then lowered her voice, sliding into the chair across from him. "Honestly, ever since those night riders showed up in town, everything's different. They've been pressuring local businesses for protection money. Yesterday, they smashed Mr. Peterson's hardware store windows when he refused to pay." Her hands trembled slightly as she poured him a refill, the coffee pot clinking against his cup. Harold's jaw tightened. The Night Riders, a motorcycle gang that had rolled into Cedar Grove 6 months ago, bringing trouble with them. They weren't just rowdy bikers. Something darker lurked beneath their leather jackets and chrome bikes. He'd seen enough combat to recognize predators when he saw them. "Don't you worry about them," Harold said, patting her hand. "This town's been through worse." He remembered the recession of '58, the flood of '72, the mill closing in '89. Cedar Grove had always bounced back, its people too stubborn to give up. Sarah managed a weak smile, but Harold could see the fear she was trying to hide. As she walked away to tend to other customers, he glanced at the old black and white photo he kept in his wallet, himself and his unit on Iwo Jima, young faces smeared with dirt and gunpowder, but standing proud. They hadn't fought for freedom just to see thugs terrorize their hometown. The photo was worn at the edges from decades of handling, but the determination in those young eyes still burned bright. The morning crowd started filtering in. Bob from the post office, his postal uniform crisp despite the early hour. Linda the school teacher, arms full of papers to grade. Officer Martinez on his regular patrol, looking more tired than usual. Harold worked on his crossword, occasionally glancing out the window at the quiet street. Cedar Grove had always been peaceful, the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and kids played freely in the streets. But lately, The rumble of motorcycles had become an ominous soundtrack to their daily lives. Even now, Harold could hear them in the distance, growing louder. The sound made conversations falter, caused mothers to gather their children closer, sent shopkeepers glancing nervously at their windows. He didn't mention it to Sarah, but he'd sent a letter to his son Thomas last week. After 30 years with the FBI, Thomas now led an elite joint task force targeting organized crime syndicates across 3 states. Harold rarely asked his son for anything. Pride and independence ran deep in the Mitchell family. But seeing the fear in Sarah's eyes, the broken windows at Peterson's store, the way people hurried home before dark, it wasn't right. The letter had been short, just a few lines about strange happenings in town. Thomas would understand the underlying message. The roar of engines grew closer, and conversation in the coffee house died down. Through the window, Harold watched 3 motorcycles pull up, chrome gleaming in the morning sun. The riders dismounted, leather jackets with the Night Rider's emblem, heavy boots, and faces that had seen the wrong side of too many fights. Their very presence seemed to dim the sunlight streaming through the windows. Harold calmly sipped his coffee, his hand steady despite the tension building in the air. He'd faced down Japanese machine gun nests in the Pacific. A few thugs on motorcycles didn't rattle him, but he also knew that sometimes the greatest courage was in choosing when to fight. Today, that choice might be made for him. Sarah's face paled as the bell above the door chimed. The peaceful morning was about to shatter, and Harold Mitchell was about to learn that even at 99, life could still throw you into one hell of a fight. The bell's cheerful ring seemed to mock the tension that swept through Ruby's coffee house. 3 members of the Night Riders swaggered in, their boots heavy on the worn wooden floor. The leader, a mountain of a man with a shaved head and a serpentine tattoo coiling up his neck, surveyed the room like a wolf sizing up prey. His name was Viper, though Harold doubted that's what his mother had called him. Conversations died mid-sentence. Linda, the school teacher, clutched her coffee cup tighter, while Bob from the post office suddenly found his newspaper fascinating. Officer Martinez had left just minutes earlier, convenient timing that Harold suspected wasn't coincidental. Well, Viper drawled, his voice carrying the rasp of too many cigarettes. Ain't this place just perfectly quaint? His 2 companions spread out, one blocking the door while the other lounged against the counter. The younger one had brass knuckles glinting on his right hand, while the third wore a knife on his hip like a badge of honor. Sarah emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Harold could see her trying to steady herself, to project confidence she didn't feel. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Viper's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Sweet of you to ask, darling. See, we're new to town trying to establish some business relationships. Ain't that right, boys?" The other 2 chuckled, the sound as warm as a gravestone in winter. "We provide a valuable service," Viper continued, running his finger along the counter. "Insurance, you might say. Protection. Times are tough. Windows break, fires start, accidents happen. But we can prevent all that. For a reasonable fee." Sarah's voice trembled slightly. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't need any protection." Viper's smile vanished. He moved closer, towering over her. "Oh, but you do. Ask old man Peterson down the street. He thought the same thing yesterday." He picked up a coffee mug, examining it. "Nice place you got here. Be a shame if something happened to it." Harold watched Sarah's face pale. The memory of Margaret flashed through his mind, how she'd stood up to price-gouging suppliers during the war, refusing to be intimidated. Some things were worth fighting for. The lady said no. Harold's voice cut through the tension, clear and steady. Every head in the place turned toward him. Viper turned slowly as if he couldn't believe someone had spoken up. His eyes found Harold, taking in the elderly man, the distinguished service cross pin, the steady gaze that hadn't wavered. "Well, look what we got here," Viper said, stalking toward Harold's table. "Grandpa's feeling brave." He leaned down, placing both hands on Harold's table. "You got something to say, old-timer?" Harold met his gaze calmly. "I said, the lady doesn't need your protection. This town doesn't need your kind of help." The younger biker with the brass knuckles snickered. Maybe his hearing aid's broken. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Want me to help him hear better, Viper? You fought in the war, didn't you? Viper asked, noticing Harold's pin. Then you should know better than anyone. The world belongs to those willing to take it. He picked up Harold's coffee cup, dumping its contents onto the crossword puzzle. Your generation's time is over, old man. Step aside and let the new order take charge. Harold didn't flinch as coffee soaked through his newspaper. I fought against men like you in the Pacific. Bullies who thought their strength gave them the right to terrorize others. They learned differently. Viper's face darkened. That was then. This is now. He grabbed Harold's collar, yanking him halfway out of his seat. And now, you're going to learn what happens to people who don't show proper respect. Let him go, Sarah cried out, rushing forward. The biker by the counter caught her arm, holding her back. Last chance, old man, Viper growled. Apologize and mind your own business. Harold's voice remained steady. I've stared down the barrels of Japanese guns on Iwo Jima. You don't frighten me, son. The punch came fast, a vicious right hook that caught Harold across the jaw. The force knocked him backward, sending him crashing into his chair and then to the floor. Coffee cups shattered, and someone screamed. Harold tasted blood in his mouth, but he pushed himself up, using the table for support. Still want to play hero? Viper asked, cracking his knuckles. Harold straightened up, wiping blood from his lip. His legs were shaky, but his voice remained firm. I've been hit harder by better men than you. Viper's face contorted with rage. He drew back his fist again, but Sarah's voice cut through the tension. Stop, please! She was crying now, struggling against the biker's grip. I'll pay. Just don't hurt him. Viper paused, then smiled coldly. Smart girl. He turned back to Harold. Hear that, hero? She's smarter than you. He leaned in close, his voice a whisper. Cross me again, and next time you won't get up. The bikers swaggered out, leaving behind a wake of broken dishes and shattered peace. The rumble of their motorcycles faded into the distance as Sarah rushed to Harold's side. Mr. Mitchell, oh God, we need to call an ambulance. Harold waved her off, though his jaw throbbed fiercely. I'm fine, dear, just help me up. As Sarah and Bob helped him back into his chair, Harold's hand went to his wallet. Not to the money inside, but to the photo behind it. His old unit from Iwo Jima stared back at him, and beside it, a more recent photo. His son Thomas in his FBI uniform, standing proud at his task force appointment ceremony. Harold's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from controlled rage. He'd just witnessed firsthand what these thugs were doing to his town. It was time to make that phone call. The Night Riders had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They just didn't know it yet. Harold sat in his leather recliner, holding an ice pack to his jaw as evening shadows crept across his living room. The grandfather clock in the corner, another of Margaret's treasures, ticked away steadily, marking each moment since the incident at Ruby's. His distinguished service cross lay on the side table, its bronze surface catching the last rays of sunlight streaming through the bay window. The phone felt heavy in his hand as he dialed the number he rarely used. Each ring seemed to echo his heartbeat until a familiar voice answered. Deputy Director Mitchell. Thomas, Harold said, then paused. In all his 99 years, asking for help had never come easily. Dad? Thomas's tone shifted instantly from professional to concerned. What's wrong? Nothing I can't handle, Harold started, but winced as his jaw protested. The sharp intake of breath didn't escape his son's notice. You're hurt. It wasn't a question. Tell me everything. Harold could picture his son already reaching for a pen and paper, the investigator in him taking over. Thomas had always been methodical, even as a child, taking apart his toys to understand how they worked, asking endless questions about Harold's war stories, analyzing every detail. Some local trouble, Harold explained, trying to downplay it. A motorcycle gang's moved into Cedar Grove. They're running a protection racket, threatening businesses. Today at Ruby's, their leader took exception to my suggestion that they leave town. A long silence followed, broken only by the sound of Thomas's measured breathing. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled, but Harold recognized the underlying steel. It was the same tone he'd used when he'd accepted his task force appointment. "They hit you." Again, not a question. "Just a lucky punch," Harold said. "Your old man's still pretty tough." "Dad," Thomas's voice softened. "You should have called me sooner. Cedar Grove's still home. I would have—" "You have bigger concerns than a small-town gang," Harold interrupted. "Running the Joint Operations Task Force, hunting down major crime syndicates. I didn't want to bother you with this." "Listen to me carefully," Thomas said, and Harold heard papers rustling in the background. "The Night Riders aren't just some local thugs. We've been tracking their organization across 3 states. Drugs, weapons, human trafficking. They're connected to larger criminal enterprises. Cedar Grove is just their newest expansion." Harold straightened in his chair. "You knew we're here." "We've been building a case," Thomas replied. "Their leader, Viktor Viper Kovalev, he's wanted in connection with multiple homicides, but he's careful, leaves no evidence. We needed something solid to move on." A pause. "Until now." "Assaulting a 99-year-old veteran in broad daylight," Harold mused. "Not so careful after all." "No, they weren't." Thomas's voice hardened. "And they just made their last mistake. Nobody touches my father." Harold heard more movement, quick conversations in the background. Thomas was already mobilizing. "I'm bringing the task force to Cedar Grove," Thomas continued. "Full operation. FBI, DEA, ATF. We'll coordinate with local law enforcement. We've been waiting for an opportunity like this." "Son," Harold started, but Thomas wasn't finished. "These people, Dad, they're not just thugs. They're organized crime, part of a larger network we've been trying to dismantle. Your assault gives us probable cause for a full investigation. We can finally move on them." Harold heard the familiar sound of his son checking his service weapon, a habit since his rookie days with the Bureau. "When will you arrive?" "First light. I'm bringing my best team. Agent Sarah Chen, she's our tech specialist, can hack any system they're using. Marcus Rodriguez, former Delta Force, he'll handle tactical. And Kate Sullivan, best undercover operator I've ever worked with." Harold nodded, pride swelling in his chest. Thomas had come a long way from the curious boy who'd played cops and robbers in the backyard. Now he commanded one of the most elite task forces in federal law enforcement, hunting down the worst criminals in the country. "Just promise me one thing," Harold said, his voice grave. "Don't let this be about revenge. Don't let them make you sloppy." "This isn't about revenge, Dad," Thomas replied, though Harold detected the edge in his voice. "This is about justice. The Night Riders have hurt too many people, destroyed too many lives. It ends here." Harold heard a helicopter spinning up in the background. "You're coming now, aren't you?" "Like I said, first light. Keep your doors locked tonight. And Dad?" Thomas paused. "Thank you for calling. I know it wasn't easy." As Harold hung up the phone, he looked at the photos on his mantle. Thomas's graduation from Quantico, his promotion ceremony, the day he took command of the task force. Next to them stood older images. Harold's unit in the Pacific, his wedding photo with Margaret, the day they'd bought this house. The Night Riders thought they'd chosen an easy target, a helpless old man in a quiet town. Instead, they'd just triggered an operation years in the making. Their days of terrorizing Cedar Grove were numbered, and it had all started with one punch thrown at the wrong veteran. Harold touched his bruised jaw gently, remembering Viper's sneer, Sarah's tears, the fear in his neighbor's eyes. By this time tomorrow, the Night Riders would learn exactly who they'd messed with, both the old warrior and his son. The grandfather clock struck 9, its deep chimes echoing through the quiet house. Somewhere in the distance, Harold heard motorcycles rumbling. Soon those sounds would be replaced by the rhythm of justice being served, and Harold Mitchell would be there to watch it happen. Dawn painted Cedar Grove's sky in shades of purple and gold as 3 black SUVs rolled into town, their government plates catching the early morning light. Thomas Mitchell stood in Ruby's coffee house, his 6 feet 2 inches frame imposing in his tactical gear and FBI windbreaker. His eyes, the same sharp blue as his father's, scanned the scene where the assault had taken place. Sarah wrung her hands nervously as she recounted yesterday's events. Behind Thomas, his team spread out through the coffee house. Agent Chen was already setting up her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as she accessed local surveillance networks. Rodriguez examined the point of impact where Harold had fallen, while Sullivan interviewed other witnesses who'd been present. "They've been coming around for months," Sarah explained, her voice steadier now with federal agents present. "At first, it was just presence, hanging around, making people nervous. Then the demand started." Thomas nodded, making notes in his small black notebook. "Tell me about their leader, the one who assaulted my father. Everything you remember." "He calls himself Viper, tall, shaved head, snake tattoo on his neck. The way he moved." Sarah shuddered. Like he was enjoying it. Like hurting an elderly man made him feel powerful. "Chief," Rodriguez called out, holding up a brass knuckle imprint he'd found on a broken table edge. "This matches the weapon profile from the Carson City assaults." Thomas's jaw tightened. The Night Riders had left a trail of broken bones and shattered lives across 3 states, but they'd always managed to stay one step ahead of law enforcement. Until now. "Agent Chen," Thomas called out. "What do you have?" Sarah Chen looked up from her laptop, her expression grim but satisfied. "Traffic cameras caught their escape route yesterday. They're operating out of the old Riverside Mill complex on the edge of town. Thermal imaging shows at least 20 individuals inside, heavy vehicle traffic at night. They've set up some kind of signal jammer, but I'm working around it." "Sullivan?" Thomas turned to his undercover specialist. Kate Sullivan tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "Local contacts confirm they're moving product through town, using the old railroad lines to transport drugs and weapons. The protection racket is just a cover for larger operations." Thomas absorbed the information, his mind already mapping out strategy. He'd been tracking the Night Riders for 18 months, watching them expand their criminal empire. They were smart, organized, and ruthless, but they'd made a crucial mistake in Cedar Grove. "Mr. Mitchell," Officer Martinez entered the coffee house, looking uncomfortable. Deputy Director. "There's something you should know." He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Some of our officers, they're on the take. Night Riders have people inside the department." Thomas wasn't surprised. It fit the pattern. Corrupting local law enforcement was standard procedure for organizations like this. "Names?" Martinez handed over a folded piece of paper. "These 3 have been suspiciously absent during Night Rider incidents, and Chief Brooks, he's been blocking any serious investigation." "That ends today," Thomas said firmly. He turned to his team. "Chen, I want everything. Bank records, phone logs, surveillance footage. Find out who's dirty. Rodriguez, map out tactical approaches to the mill complex. Sullivan, get your CIs to confirm numbers and armaments. We move fast, but we move smart." The coffee house had become a temporary command center, laptops and equipment covering the tables where yesterday patrons had enjoyed their morning coffee. Thomas walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street that would soon become a battlefield. His phone buzzed, a text from Harold. "Coming down to Ruby's." "Negative," Thomas typed back. "Stay home. We're establishing a perimeter." The response was immediate. "My town, son. My fight." Before Thomas could argue, the door chimed and Harold walked in, moving carefully but deliberately. The bruise on his jaw had darkened to a deep purple, but his eyes were clear and determined. "Dad," Thomas started, but Harold raised a hand. "I know what you're going to say," Harold interrupted. "But I'm not sitting this out. These people aren't just criminals. They're cowards who prey on the weak. We didn't fight wars to let thugs like this terrorize our homes." Thomas recognized that look. He'd seen it in old photos of his father on Iwo Jima, in the stories of courage under fire that had earned him the Distinguished Service Cross. There would be no talking him out of this. "Fine," Thomas conceded, "but you stay behind the lines. This is a federal operation now. Harold nodded, then turned to Sarah. Coffee for these fine agents? They look like they could use it. Sarah managed a small smile, the first since yesterday's attack. As she started brewing fresh pots, Thomas gathered his team for their initial briefing. The clock was ticking. The Night Riders think they're untouchable, Thomas addressed his agents. They think their connections protect them. That fear keeps them safe. Today, we prove them wrong. Today, we show them that no one is above the law. He spread out a map of Cedar Grove marking key locations. The mill complex, police station, known associate locations. This wasn't just about one assault anymore. This was about taking down an entire criminal organization that had terrorized communities across 3 states, and it had all started because they picked the wrong veteran to punch. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the task force's makeshift command center in Ruby's coffee house. Agent Chen's fingers suddenly stopped their constant movement across her keyboard. "Chief," she called out, her voice tight with urgency. "You need to see this." Thomas moved quickly to her station, Harold watching intently from his position near the window. The screen displayed a complex web of financial transactions, shell companies, and encrypted communications. The Night Riders aren't just connected to organized crime, Chen explained, bringing up document after document. They're a direct arm of the Kovacs Syndicate. Thomas's breath caught. The Kovacs Syndicate was one of the most dangerous criminal enterprises in North America, responsible for billions in illegal weapons trades, drug trafficking, and suspected of infiltrating government agencies at multiple levels. That's not all, Chen continued, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Remember that signal jammer at the mill? It's military grade, the kind that costs millions and isn't supposed to exist outside of government agencies. Rodriguez joined them, his tactical gear creaking as he leaned in. The weapons we've been tracking, they're not street-level hardware. We're talking next-gen prototypes, classified military tech that hasn't even been announced yet. Harold watched his son's face harden. Someone's supplying them from the inside, Thomas said, his voice cold. Multiple someones, Sullivan added, approaching with her own tablet. My contacts just confirmed. The Night Riders have people placed in local government, law enforcement, even federal agencies. Cedar Grove isn't just another territory for them. It's a test run. Thomas straightened, running a hand through his dark hair. A test run for what? Chen pulled up another screen, this one showing satellite imagery of the surrounding area. The old railroad lines, the mill's location, the timing of their arrival, it all fits. Cedar Grove sits at a perfect crossroads for their operation. Small enough to control, but with infrastructure they can use. They're building a hub, Rodriguez realized, a distribution center for the entire Kovacs network. Harold stepped forward, his military training kicking in as he studied the maps. The mill complex. During the war, it had underground storage areas, tunnels that connected to the railroad lines. We used them to move military supplies. Thomas's eyes widened. That's why they chose this location. They're not just using the mill as a base. They're expanding the tunnel network, creating an underground pipeline for their entire operation. Sullivan checked her phone, her face growing grave. It gets worse. My source just sent this. She held up her screen, showing a message. There's a major shipment coming in tonight. Whatever they're moving, it's big enough that Victor Kovac himself is overseeing the operation. The room fell silent. Victor Kovac, the shadowy head of the syndicate, had never been photographed. No law enforcement agency had ever gotten close to him. If he was personally involving himself, this isn't just about Cedar Grove anymore, Thomas said, his tactical mind already racing. This is our chance to take down the entire syndicate. Harold watched the pieces fall into place. That's why they were so aggressive about establishing control here. Why they didn't care about being subtle anymore. They needed total compliance before tonight. And anyone who might interfere had to be eliminated or scared into silence, Thomas added, looking at his father's bruised jaw. You weren't just standing up to local thugs, Dad. You were disrupting a major criminal enterprise's timetable. Chen's laptop pinged with new alerts. Chief, I'm picking up increased communications, coded signals, but the pattern suggests they're mobilizing. Whatever's happening tonight, it's already in motion. Rodriguez checked his weapon. We need to move now. Once that shipment arrives and Kovac is in play, this whole situation gets exponentially more dangerous. But Thomas held up a hand, his eyes still scanning the data on Chen's screen. Wait, look at these shipping manifestos, the cargo descriptions, the routing numbers. His face paled slightly. This isn't just drugs or weapons. They're moving something else, something classified. Harold leaned in, his experienced eyes catching details others might miss. These markings, I've seen them before. In the Pacific, they're warning symbols for biological agents. Jesus, Sullivan breathed. They're not just building a distribution hub, they're setting up a weapons lab. Thomas's phone suddenly buzzed, a text from an unknown number. His screen displayed a single image. Harold at the window of Ruby's coffee house, viewed through a sniper's scope, time-stamped 5 minutes ago. They know we're here, Thomas said, his voice deadly calm. And they're sending a message. Harold stood straighter, decades of military bearing taking over. Then it's time we send one back. The afternoon sun continued its arc across the sky, unaware that beneath its warm light, Cedar Grove had become ground zero for what could be the largest organized crime takedown in American history. The quiet town's streets would soon become a battlefield, and the night riders were about to learn that threatening a veteran and his son had consequences they never could have imagined. The clock on the wall read 3:47 p.m. In a few hours, darkness would fall, and with it would come either justice or catastrophe. There would be no middle ground. The sun was setting over Cedar Grove when the first warning arrived. Thomas stood at Ruby's window, watching his tactical team secure the perimeter, when 3 motorcycles roared down Main Street. Instead of stopping, they did a slow drive-by, one rider deliberately dropping a package on the sidewalk before they disappeared around the corner. "Hold positions," Thomas ordered into his radio as Rodriguez moved to retrieve the package. The veteran Delta Force operator approached it cautiously, checking for tripwires or pressure triggers before bringing it inside. The package contained a single USB drive and a Polaroid photograph. Thomas felt his blood run cold as he looked at the image. It showed Harold's house from earlier that morning, but with additional photos paperclipped to it. Harold's late wife Margaret's grave, Sarah behind the counter at Ruby's, and surveillance shots of every person who'd witnessed yesterday's confrontation. "Chen," Thomas called out, tossing her the USB drive. "Screen it." Agent Chen connected the drive to an isolated laptop. Multiple video files appeared, each labeled with a date and location. She clicked the first one, and the screen filled with footage of other Night Rider attacks. Businesses burning, families fleeing their homes, people being beaten in the streets. The final video was different. High-quality drone footage of Cedar Grove, showing everyone who'd entered Ruby's coffee house in the last 24 hours. "They're watching all of us," Sullivan said, her hand instinctively moving to her weapon. Harold studied the footage with military precision. "Not just watching. They're saying they can reach anyone, anywhere." Thomas's phone rang. Unknown number. He put it on speaker. Deputy Director Mitchell. The voice was smooth, cultured, nothing like Viper's crude threats. "I trust you received our message." "Victor Kovac," Thomas replied, nodding to Chen, who immediately began trying to trace the call. "You're taking a risk reaching out directly." A soft chuckle came through the speaker. "The risk is yours, Director, and your father's, and everyone else in that charming little coffee house you've turned into a command center." Harold stepped forward. "You don't frighten me, son. Better men than you have tried." "Ah, the elder Mr. Mitchell. I must apologize for Viper's crude behavior yesterday. Had I known who you were, I would have handled your persuasion more diplomatically." "Like surveilling my wife's grave?" Harold's voice was steel. "Like threatening innocent people?" "Collateral motivation," Kovac replied smoothly. "You see, Cedar Grove is essential to our operations. We've invested considerable resources here. The infrastructure, the logistics, the properly motivated local officials. It's all quite perfectly arranged." Thomas cut in. "It's over, Kovac. We know about the biological weapons, the military tech, everything. You're done." "Am I?" Kovac sounded amused. Check your phones, all of you. Everyone's phones buzzed simultaneously. New messages appeared. Personal photos, family addresses, private information that shouldn't have been accessible. You see, Kovac continued, we are thoroughly prepared. In fact, there's a Knight Rider chapter currently near Agent Chen's parents in San Francisco, another near Agent Rodriguez's sister in Houston, and Agent Sullivan. How is your brother enjoying rehab? Be a shame if someone delivered something to tempt his recovery. The room went deadly silent. You have 1 hour, Kovac said. Remove your forces from Cedar Grove. Clear any surveillance. Delete all data you've gathered. In return, everyone lives. Refuse and, well, he paused. Let's just say Viper's visit to Ruby's will seem like a pleasant memory in comparison. And if we agree? Thomas asked, his mind racing through options. Then Cedar Grove remains under our protection. Life goes on. Your father can enjoy his retirement in peace. A reasonable compromise, wouldn't you say? Harold stepped closer to the phone. You know what I saw in the Pacific? Men like you who thought they could break people's spirits, who thought fear could conquer courage. Know what happened to them? This isn't war, Mr. Mitchell, Kovac replied, his amusement fading. This is business. No, Harold said firmly. This became war the moment you threatened my family. And son, I've never lost a war. The line went quiet for a moment. When Kovac spoke again, all pretense of civility was gone. 1 hour. Then we do this the hard way. The call ended. Thomas looked at his team, seeing the worry in their eyes as they looked at their phones, at the threats against their loved ones. He's bluffing, Rodriguez said, but his voice lacked conviction. No, he isn't, Thomas replied. But neither are we. He turned to Chen. Get me secure lines to every field office within 500 miles. Rodriguez, call in every tactical team you can reach. Sullivan, activate all your undercover assets. What are you thinking? Harold asked, recognizing the look in his son's eyes. Thomas's face was set with determination. They want to threaten our families? Fine. Let's show them what happens when you back federal agents into a corner. We're not just taking down their operation anymore. We're burning the entire Kovac syndicate to the ground. The sun had fully set now, leaving Cedar Grove in darkness. But in Ruby's coffee house, the light of righteous fury burned bright. They had 1 hour to prepare for war, and this time, it was personal. The hour Kovac gave them hadn't quite expired when Thomas Mitchell initiated his countermove. Ruby's coffee house had transformed into a war room, tactical maps spread across tables while Agent Chen's computer array hummed with activity. Harold watched his son direct operations with the same precision he'd once seen generals use in the Pacific. Status report, Thomas commanded, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Chen looked up from her screens. All regional field offices are mobilized. We've got teams moving to protect our families. San Francisco office has eyes on the Knight Riders near my parents. They're not going anywhere. Houston field office reports the same, Rodriguez added, checking his tactical tablet. My sister's secure, they're tracking the Knight Riders' movements. Sullivan approached with fresh intelligence. My CI just confirmed. Kovac is bringing in heavy reinforcements. 3 trucks just crossed the state line heading this way. But here's the interesting part. They're not all heading to the mill. Thomas raised an eyebrow. They're splitting their forces. Smart, Harold commented, studying the map. In the Pacific, we learned the hard way not to concentrate all our resources in one location. They're expecting us to hit the mill, Thomas said, his tactical mind working. It's the obvious target, which means it's a trap, Rodriguez finished. They want us to commit our forces there while they move their real operation elsewhere. Chen's fingers flew across her keyboard. Thermal imaging shows heavy activity at the mill, but... She paused, frowning. The heat signatures are wrong. They're too uniform. Decoys, Harold said. Space heaters, probably. Making it look like there's more personnel than there really is. Thomas smiled grimly. They think they're playing us. Time to show them they're not the only ones who can set a trap. He turned to his team. New plan. Rodriguez, take Alpha Team and make a lot of noise at the mill. I want them to think that's our main thrust. What about the real operation? Sullivan asked. Thomas pointed to the map. The railroad tunnels, Dad, you said they connect to the mill? Harold nodded. And to 3 other points in town. During the war, we used them to move supplies without being observed. There's an entrance behind the old Peterson place, another near the church, and one by the river. Chen, get me underground schematics. Thomas's eyes never left the map. Sullivan, your team will take the river entrance. I'll lead Bravo team through the church access point. And me? Harold asked quietly. Thomas turned to his father. I need you to coordinate from here. These tunnels could have changed since the war. We need someone who knows their original layout to guide us through. Harold understood the real reason. Thomas was trying to keep him safe. But before he could protest, Chen's system pinged urgently. Movement at the mill, she reported. They're evacuating? Surveillance footage showed night riders quickly loading vehicles, preparing to move out. They're spooked, Rodriguez said. But why? We haven't even moved yet. Thomas's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Time's up. Hope you made the right choice. Suddenly, explosions rocked the northern part of town. Through the windows, they could see flames rising from the direction of the high school. Multiple detonations, Chen called out, tracking emergency responses. The high school, the courthouse, and oh God. What? Thomas demanded. They hit the nursing home, Chen said, her voice shaking. East Wing, where the critical care patients are. The room fell silent. Then Harold's voice cut through the shock, cold and hard. They're testing us, seeing if we'll split our forces to help with rescue operations. Thomas was already moving. They want to force our hand, make us choose between stopping them and saving lives. He grabbed his tactical vest. Rodriguez, get to the nursing home. Sullivan, take the high school. I want our people helping with evacuations, but keep some teams in reserve. They're monsters, Sarah whispered from where she'd been quietly making coffee for the agents. No, Harold said, standing straighter despite his age. They're cowards, using the helpless as shields. He turned to Thomas. You're going to need someone who knows the old emergency response protocols. Someone who remembers how this town handled crises before fancy federal procedures. Thomas met his father's eyes. They shared a long look, years of mutual respect and understanding passing between them. Okay, Thomas finally said. But you stay with Chen, coordinate through comms. No direct engagement. Harold nodded, though there was something in his eyes that made Thomas pause. All teams move out, Thomas ordered. As his forces deployed, he turned back to his father. I know that look, Dad. What are you thinking? Harold smiled grimly. Just remembering something from Iwo Jima. Sometimes when the enemy thinks they've got you figured out, that's your best chance to surprise them. Through the windows, more emergency vehicles raced past, sirens wailing. The night riders had just raised the stakes, turning Cedar Grove into a war zone, but they'd made a crucial mistake. They thought their show of force would paralyze the task force with moral dilemmas. Instead, they'd just given Thomas's team all the justification they needed to take off the gloves. The time for measured responses was over. Now, it was time to show Kovac and his night riders what happened when they pushed 2 generations of Mitchell men too far. The real battle for Cedar Grove was about to begin. Chaos erupted across Cedar Grove as emergency responders rushed to the blast sites. Inside Ruby's coffee house, Harold Mitchell watched the tactical displays, while Agent Chen coordinated the federal response. His son's voice crackled over the secure channel, directing teams through the underground tunnel network. All units report, Thomas commanded through the comm system. Alpha team in position, Rodriguez responded. We've secured the nursing home. Minimal casualties. Looks like they meant to scare, not kill. Yet. Beta team here, Sullivan added. High school's clear. But Chief, we found something. Sending photos now. Chen's screens lit up with incoming images. The photos showed sophisticated timer devices attached to the explosive charges, military-grade hardware that shouldn't have been available to civilian terrorists. Those detonators, Harold said, leaning closer. They're restricted technology used for specialized demolition operations. Chen's fingers flew across her keyboard. Running serial numbers. These were reported destroyed in a military base fire 3 months ago, along with a shipment of biological weapons. The same base where our weapons disappeared, a new voice said. Everyone turned to see a man in a military uniform standing in the doorway. Colonel James Harrison, Thomas's longtime friend from their joint task force days. Jim? Harold asked, surprised. What are you doing here? Following a trail, Harrison replied, stepping inside. One that just got a lot clearer. He placed a file on the table. We've been investigating weapons disappearances from multiple bases, always after convenient accidents that destroyed inventory records. Chen opened the file on her system. These bases, they all had the same security contractor, Blackstream Securities. Owned by a holding company, Harrison continued, which traces back through 7 shell corporations to the Kovac Syndicate, Thomas finished, his voice tight over the comms. They've infiltrated military security. Harold studied the documents, his combat experience highlighting details others might miss. These aren't random thefts. This is systematic. They're building an arsenal. Not just an arsenal, Harrison said grimly. A private army. They've been recruiting ex-military personnel, especially those with specialized training. The Night Riders are just their street muscle. The real force is something else entirely. Chen's system suddenly pinged with urgent alerts. Chief, you need to see this. I've cracked their communication encryption. The explosions weren't just a distraction. They're covering something bigger. Multiple vehicles are converging on the old civil defense bunker? Harold's face paled. The bunker, of course. He turned to the map. During the Cold War, they built a hardened facility under Cedar Grove. It was supposed to house government officials in case of nuclear war. What happened to it? Thomas asked through the comms. Decommissioned in the 90s, Harrison answered. Or so we thought. Blackstream Securities bought the land 3 years ago through a subsidiary. Sullivan's voice crackled over the radio. Chief, we just found their demo plans. The explosions weren't random. They're collapsing specific underground sections to create a secure corridor to the bunker. It's not just a weapons lab they're building, Harold realized. It's a fortress, self-contained, hardened against attack, with direct access to their transport network. Chen's screens filled with new data. Thermal imaging shows massive power usage at the bunker site. They've been running it hot for months, disguising it as industrial activity. And, oh God. What is it? Thomas demanded. Radiation signatures, Chen reported. Low level but consistent with weapons-grade material. Harrison swore softly. They're not just stealing our weapons, they're building their own. The implications hit everyone at once. The Night Riders' protection racket, the weapons theft, even the attack on Harold. It was all cover for something much bigger. Cedar Grove wasn't just going to be a distribution hub. It was going to be the headquarters for a private military force armed with stolen and manufactured weapons of mass destruction. Thomas, Harold said, his voice carrying the weight of combat experience, if they get that facility fully operational, they could hold entire cities hostage, Thomas finished. No one would be able to touch them. Static crackled over the comms as Thomas processed this information. When he spoke again, his voice was pure steel. New objective. We take that bunker. Tonight. Before they can move any more equipment or personnel inside. Sir, Rodriguez cut in. With respect, we're not equipped for this level of resistance. They'll have military-grade defenses, trained operators. We don't have a choice, Thomas replied. If we wait for backup, they'll fortify the position. This ends now. Harold stood, grabbing his jacket. Chen looked at him questioningly. Where are you going? She asked. That bunker has weaknesses, Harold said. Flaws in the original construction that weren't in the official plans. I know because I helped build it. Thomas's voice sharpened. Dad, no. Stay at command. Son, Harold replied, his voice firm. You need every advantage you can get. And right now, I'm the only one alive who knows how to get into that bunker without going through their defenses. A long pause followed. Everyone could feel the weight of the moment. The stakes had just risen exponentially and time was running out. Finally, Thomas spoke. Chen, get Dad a secure comm link. Harrison, I need everything you've got on Blackstream's personnel and capabilities. Everyone else prepare for full tactical assault. We move in 30 minutes. The night was about to become very interesting indeed. The basement of Ruby's coffee house had become an impromptu armory as Thomas's teams prepared for the assault on the bunker. Harold sat at a makeshift planning table sketching detailed additions to the original bunker blueprints, while Rodriguez and Sullivan checked their tactical gear. The main entrance will be heavily fortified, Harold explained, his weathered hands moving across the paper with surprising steadiness. But there's a maintenance shaft here, connected to the old ventilation system. His pencil circled a spot on the eastern side. It was designed as an emergency exit in case of nuclear attack. Thomas studied the drawings through his tactical camera feed. Chen, can you confirm the shaft's still accessible? Satellite thermal imaging shows a cold spot at those coordinates, Chen replied, her screens displaying overlapping heat signatures of the area. They might not even know it exists. Colonel Harrison pointed to another section of the blueprints. Blackstream's personnel files show they've got at least 30 ex-military operators on site, including former special forces. They'll have the best equipment too, Rodriguez added, checking his weapon. If they've been stealing military hardware, they've probably got night vision, body armor, the works. Sullivan looked up from her tactical tablet. My contacts just confirmed. They're bringing in more heavy weapons, armor-piercing rounds, explosive ordnance. They're preparing for war. Harold's eyes narrowed as he added another detail to the drawings. During construction, we installed emergency flood controls, in case the water table shifted and threatened the facility. The controls are still there, in this utility room. Could we use that? Thomas asked. Flood the lower levels? Harold nodded. Force them to higher ground, limit their mobility, but someone would need to reach the controls manually. The system was designed to be tamper-proof. No remote access. Chen's system pinged with new alerts. Movement at the bunker entrance. They're moving something big inside. Thermal signature suggests vehicles, heavy ones. Harrison examined the feed. Those are APCs, armored personnel carriers, military grade. Must have been part of their weapons theft program. Thomas's voice carried the weight of command. All right, here's the plan. Rodriguez, take Alpha Team and create a diversion at the main entrance. Make them think that's our primary assault point. On it, Chief, Rodriguez confirmed, checking his tactical vest. Sullivan, your team will approach from the west, targeting their communications array. Once that's down, Chen can jam their signals, cut them off from outside support. Sullivan nodded, already coordinating with her unit. Harrison, I need your military contacts ready to lock down a 10-mile perimeter. Nothing gets in or out once we start. Already done, Harrison replied. I've got Apache gunships on standby, just need the word. And me? Harold asked quietly. Thomas paused. Everyone could hear him weighing the options. You'll guide us through the maintenance shaft, but you stay with Chen at the mobile command post. We'll need your real-time guidance once we're inside. Harold started to protest, but Thomas continued. Dad, this isn't about keeping you safe. You're our ace in the hole. You know this facility better than anyone. We need that knowledge coordinating our movements. Chen's screens suddenly lit up with new data. Chief, energy readings just spiked at the bunker. Whatever they're powering up, it's drawing massive current. They're accelerating their timeline, Harrison observed. They must know we're planning something. Which means we move now, Thomas decided. Everyone gear up. Chen, get the mobile command center ready. Dad? I know, son, Harold said, standing with military bearing despite his age. Guide and coordinate. Just remember what I taught you about tunnel fighting. Angles are everything and sound travels differently underground. The teams began their final preparations. Rodriguez distributed specialized breaching charges. Sullivan synchronized tactical communications. Harrison coordinated with his military contacts. Through it all, Harold watched with the experienced eye of a combat veteran. Thomas, Harold said privately over the comm. "There's something else you should know about the bunker. Something that wasn't in the official plans." "What is it?" "The foundation has a structural weak point. It was a flaw in the original design, one we discovered during construction. We reinforced it, but under the right pressure. It could bring the whole place down," Thomas finished. "As a last resort," Harold confirmed, "but if you have to use it, you'll need to be precise. I'll mark the location on your tactical map." The night had deepened outside, but Cedar Grove was far from sleeping. Emergency vehicles still attended the explosion sites, their lights casting red and blue shadows across the streets. In the distance, the low rumble of heavy vehicles moving toward the bunker complex created an ominous backdrop. Thomas's voice came through the tactical network one final time. "All teams, final check. We go in dark, we go in quiet, and we don't stop until that bunker is secured. These people threatened our families, attacked our town, and thought they could hide behind stolen weapons and military hardware." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the same steel that had served his father on Iwo Jima. "Let's show them what happens when you underestimate a Mitchell. Move out." The operation to take down the Kovac Syndicate's secret fortress was about to begin, and Cedar Grove would never be the same. The assault on the bunker complex began at precisely 2300 hours. From the mobile command center, a converted SWAT vehicle parked 2 blocks away, Harold watched multiple tactical feeds while guiding the teams through his comlink. Agent Chen's screens showed thermal signatures moving like ghost images through the underground facility. "Alpha team in position," Rodriguez whispered over the secure channel. His unit had taken up positions around the main entrance, their thermal signatures barely registering thanks to advanced stealth gear. "Beta team ready," Sullivan confirmed from the western approach. Her team was poised to take out the communications array. Thomas's voice came through clearly. "Execute." The night erupted in controlled chaos. Rodriguez's team launched a coordinated flashbang assault on the main entrance, the explosions echoing through Cedar Grove's empty streets. Guards posted at the entrance responded immediately, automatic weapons fire cutting through the darkness. "Communications array targeted," Sullivan reported. Precise shots took out satellite dishes and antenna arrays. "They're dark." Chen's fingers flew across her keyboard. "Jamming their frequencies now. They're cut off from external communications." Harold studied the thermal feeds intently. "Thomas, there's movement in the lower levels. They're responding exactly as expected, sending forces up to reinforce the entrance. Which means the maintenance shaft should be clear," Thomas replied. His team's signatures showed them approaching the hidden entrance Harold had identified. Suddenly, new alerts flashed across Chen's screens. Multiple vehicles emerging from the hidden garage entrance, their armored personnel carriers. Harrison grabbed his radio. "Apache support, you are cleared hot. Do not let those vehicles break containment." The deep whomp-whomp of helicopter rotors filled the air as 2 Apache gunships descended on the area. Their mounted guns opened up, forcing the APCs to retreat back into the bunker complex. Inside the facility, Rodriguez's team was engaged in fierce combat at the main entrance. "These guys are good," he reported between bursts of gunfire. "Definitely ex-military. They're using advanced tactics, working as units." "Status on the entrance?" Thomas asked. "Holding them, but they've got superior position. We need that diversion now." Harold leaned forward, watching thermal signatures shift through the lower levels. "Thomas, you're approaching the flood control room. Panel should be on the north wall." Through Thomas's tactical camera, they could see his team moving efficiently through the maintenance shaft. They encountered 2 guards, but silenced them before they could raise an alarm. The flood control room looked exactly as Harold remembered it. "Found it," Thomas confirmed. "Chen, coordinated timing on my mark." Everything happened at once. Thomas's team activated the flood controls, sending thousands of gallons of groundwater surging through the lower levels. Rodriguez's unit launched a new assault at the main entrance. Sullivan's team breached the western wall using shaped charges. "Multiple targets retreating upward," Chen reported, tracking thermal signatures. "They're being forced to the upper levels just as planned." But something was wrong. Harold noticed it first, a pattern in the enemy movements that seemed too organized, too prepared. Thomas, wait. Harold started, but it was too late. Heavy blast doors suddenly sealed throughout the facility, trapping each team in separate sections. Lights switched to red emergency mode, and a new alarm began blaring. It's a trap, Harold realized. They knew about the flood controls. They wanted us inside. All teams fall back, Thomas ordered. But they were already cut off. Chen's screens lit up with new warnings. Chief, I'm detecting radiation spikes in multiple sections. They're activating something. Through the tactical feeds, they could see a strange blue glow emanating from several rooms. Men in protective suits were moving equipment, cylindrical containers that pulsed with the same eerie light. Those are the stolen nuclear materials, Harrison said grimly. They're not just storing them, they're actively working with them. A new voice cut through their communications. Smooth, cultured, familiar. Director Mitchell, Kovacs said, I must admit your assault was well planned. Using the flood controls was particularly clever. Your father's insight, I assume. How did you, Thomas began. Know about the maintenance shaft, the emergency systems, please. We've had 6 months to study every inch of this facility. Did you really think we wouldn't find all its secrets? Harold watched in growing horror as more blast doors sealed, further compartmentalizing the teams. The radiation signatures were growing stronger. Now, Kovacs continued, let me demonstrate why taking this facility is impossible. Each sealed section contains a small radiation source. Nothing immediately lethal, but exposure builds quickly. Your teams have perhaps 30 minutes before they start experiencing severe effects. Unless, of course, you order an immediate withdrawal. You're bluffing, Thomas growled. You'll expose your own people. My personnel are wearing protective gear. Yours, I notice, are not. A tactical oversight on your part. Harold's mind raced, drawing on decades-old memories of the facility's construction. There had to be a way out. Had to be something they'd missed. You have 10 minutes to begin withdrawing your forces, Kovacs said. After that, I increase the radiation levels. Choose wisely, Director. The command center fell silent except for the steady beeping of radiation warnings. They had just gone from executing a careful assault to fighting against time itself, and the stakes had never been higher. The battle for the bunker had just become a potential nuclear nightmare. Red warning lights bathed the mobile command center in an apocalyptic glow as radiation warnings continued to flash across Chen's screens. Harold Mitchell watched the tactical feeds with growing dread as his son, and the other teams remained trapped inside the bunker complex. Radiation levels rising in all sealed sections, Chen reported, her voice tight. 8 minutes until critical exposure begins. Thomas's tactical camera showed his team trying to breach the blast doors, but even their specialized equipment barely scratched the hardened steel. These doors were designed to withstand nuclear strikes, he said, frustration evident in his voice. We can't cut through in time. Your decision, Director Mitchell? Kovacs' smooth voice carried an edge of triumph. Your people's lives or your mission? The clock is ticking. Rodriguez's team was pinned down near the main entrance, exchanging fire with well-equipped security forces. Chief, we've got wounded. 2 of my men took hits, and this radiation, they're starting to feel sick. Sullivan's voice crackled through with similar news. Beta teams showing early radiation symptoms, headaches, nausea. We need to move now. Colonel Harrison studied the tactical displays grimly. Even if we could get Apache support to breach the outer walls, the radiation would spread throughout Cedar Grove. They've turned the entire facility into a dead man's switch. Harold watched the thermal signatures of Thomas's team growing weaker as the radiation took its toll. His hands clenched into fists, the same hands that had once fought across the Pacific, that had helped build this very bunker. Wait. The concrete, Harold said suddenly, his voice cutting through the chaos. Thomas, what do you see around you? The walls. Describe them. Through Thomas's camera, they could see the corridor walls. Standard reinforced concrete, Dad. What are we looking for? The color. Harold leaned forward intently. Is there a slight bluish tint to it? Thomas moved closer to one wall. Yes, almost like it's been treated with something. Boron-treated concrete, Harold said, memories flooding back. We used it in certain sections as additional radiation shielding, but it was expensive, so we only used it in critical areas. Chen caught on immediately, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Pulling up the original construction manifests. If we can identify which sections use treated concrete, we can map safe zones, Harrison finished. Areas where the radiation shielding would offer protection. More than that, Harold said, his tactical mind racing. The treated sections were connected to the emergency ventilation system, the same system that maintenance shaft connects to. Thomas understood immediately. We can use the ventilation network to move between shielded areas, bypass the sealed doors entirely. But Kovac's voice cut through their moment of hope. A clever plan. Unfortunately, we've already thought of it. New alarms began blaring through the facility. The ventilation system is now flooding with nerve gas. Any attempt to access it will be unfortunate. The situation had just gone from bad to worse. They now faced an impossible choice: radiation exposure in the sealed sections, nerve gas in the ventilation system, or full retreat. 5 minutes, Kovac reminded them silently. Harold closed his eyes, seeing again the beaches of Iwo Jima, remembering impossible situations that required impossible solutions. Then he remembered something else, something about the bunker's construction that hadn't made it into any official records. "Thomas," he said urgently, "you remember the structural weak point I mentioned? The flaw in the foundation?" "Dad, if we collapse the structure with everyone inside, not collapse. Listen carefully." Harold pulled up the original blueprints. The weak point is directly under the main power distribution center. A focused breach there wouldn't bring down the facility, but it would disrupt their power grid, Chen realized. The blast doors are electromagnetically sealed. No power. No containment, Thomas finished. "But Dad, we can't reach that section. It's behind 3 sets of sealed doors and the ventilation system is compromised." Harold stood up straight, his 99 years falling away as combat determination took over. "Yes, we can. Because there's another way in. One that isn't in any blueprint." Everyone in the command center turned to look at him. "During construction, we discovered an old mine shaft that predated the bunker. We sealed it off, but not completely. I supervised the work myself, left a narrow passage, just in case." "Where?" Thomas demanded. "Peterson's hardware store basement. The shaft entrance is hidden behind the old coal chute. I can guide someone through it. But there's a catch." "What catch?" "The passage is narrow. Very narrow. It would take someone small, someone who knows every inch of this town's underground layout." Harold's voice was steady. "Someone like me." "Absolutely not," Thomas said immediately. "Dad, you can't—" 3 minutes until critical exposure, Chen reported quietly. Harold grabbed a tactical vest. "Son, right now your people are dying in there. That mine shaft is our only shot, and I'm the only one who can find it. Sometimes the best man for a mission isn't the strongest or fastest. It's the one who knows the way." "He's right," Harrison said softly. "We're out of options." Through the tactical feed, they could see Thomas close his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they held the same determination Harold had worn on Iwo Jima. "Chen, get my father a secure comlink and basic tactical gear. Harrison, have a medical team standing by. Dad." He paused. "Just be careful." Harold checked the ancient .45 pistol he'd kept from his war days. "I survived the Pacific, son. I can survive one more mission." As he headed for the command center door, Harold Mitchell stood straight and tall. He might be 99 years old, but he was about to remind everyone why you never underestimate a veteran who's fighting for his family. The darkest hour had arrived, but with it came one last chance at victory. Peterson's hardware store stood dark and silent, its broken windows from the Night Rider's earlier intimidation now covered with plywood. Harold Mitchell moved carefully through the shadows, guided by Thomas's voice in his earpiece, while Chen tracked his position from the command center. 2 minutes until critical radiation exposure, Chen reported, her voice tense. Teams are showing increasing symptoms. Status update, Thomas commanded through the comm system. Alpha team holding position, Rodriguez responded, his voice strained. 3 men down with radiation sickness. We can't take much more of this. Beta team's similar, Sullivan added. The radiation's getting worse. Whatever they're using, it's not standard material. Harold reached the hardware store's back door, using the key Pete Peterson had given him years ago. Some things about small towns never changed. People still trusted their neighbors, still helped each other. Now that trust might save lives. I'm in, Harold whispered, moving through the familiar aisles. His flashlight beam caught the store's worn floors, the same floors he'd helped Pete install back in '82. Heading to the basement access. Be careful, Dad, Thomas said. Chen's picking up movement on the street. Night riders are patrolling. Harrison's voice cut in. Aerial surveillance shows more vehicles approaching the bunker. They're bringing in additional equipment. Probably more radiation sources, Chen added grimly. Radiation levels are still climbing in the sealed sections. Harold reached the basement door, its hinges protesting softly as he pulled it open. The stairs creaked under his weight, no helping that. As he descended into the darkness, the basement air was thick with decades of dust and the musty smell of old coal. The coal chute should be on the north wall, Harold said, moving his flashlight beam carefully. Behind some old shelving. Dad, Thomas's voice was urgent. We've got another problem. Chen just decoded some of their internal communications. The radiation sources? They're not just for containment. They're components. Components for what? A portable nuclear device. They're not just storing weapons. They're building something new. Something small enough to transport, but powerful enough to level a city. Harold's blood ran cold. He'd seen the aftermath of nuclear weapons in Japan. The idea of a portable version in the hands of people like Kovac. Found it, he reported, pushing aside the ancient shelving unit. The coal chute's metal door was rusted but intact. Behind it, barely visible, was the narrow passage he'd helped conceal decades ago. I'm going in. Be careful, Thomas warned. That passage has been unmaintained for years. Plus, you'll be heading directly under their facility. If they detect you. They won't, Harold said firmly, squeezing through the tight opening. This old man still knows a few tricks about moving quiet. The passage was narrower than he remembered, barely wide enough for his shoulders. His tactical vest scraped against rough rock as he moved forward, guided by memory and determination. Every few feet, he had to stop and clear debris or shore up weak spots. 1 minute to critical exposure, Chen reported. Harold heard the strain in Thomas's voice as he addressed his teams. Hold positions. Help is coming. Just hold on. Sir, Rodriguez replied. We're starting to lose consciousness here. Whatever they're using, it's not normal radiation. He's right, Chen confirmed. These readings, they're like nothing in our database. It's as if they've modified the material somehow, made it more aggressive. Harrison cut in. They've weaponized it, turned the radiation itself into an active weapon rather than just a byproduct. Harold continued through the passage, his joints protesting, but his will unshakable. How far to the power center? 30 meters ahead, Chen replied. But Dad, I'm picking up vibrations. They're moving heavy equipment directly above you. The tunnel creaked ominously, dust and small rocks raining down. Harold pressed forward, ignoring the discomfort, the fear, the knowledge that one cave-in would end everything. Thomas, he whispered, if this works, if we kill the power, the blast doors will release, Thomas confirmed. But Dad, there's more. Chen found their contingency protocols. If the power fails, they're prepared to trigger their weapon components, create a chain reaction that would make 3 Mile Island look like a firecracker. Then we don't just kill the power, Harold said, reaching the position under the power center. We have to do it in exactly the right way. He pulled out the small explosive charges Harrison had given him. Remember what I taught you about demolitions and structures? Sequential detonation, Thomas replied, creating a cascade effect. Exactly. We need to kill their power in a specific sequence. Take out the main distribution first, then the backups, then the emergency systems. Give them no time to implement failsafes. But the timing would have to be perfect, Chen warned. Split-second precision. Harold placed the charges carefully, just as he'd done countless times in the Pacific. Then it's a good thing you have computers to help, isn't it? Above him, the sound of heavy equipment grew louder. Time was running out for everyone. The teams trapped in radiation-flooded sections. The unconscious agents. The town itself unknowingly at risk from weapons designed to devastate cities. Charges set, Harold reported. Chen, you have control of the detonators. Ready on your mark, Chief, she confirmed. Thomas's voice came through clearly. All teams prepare for breach. The second those doors open, we move. Dad. I know, son, Harold said, already starting his careful retreat through the passage. Just like Iwo Jima, when the charges blow, we give them hell. The final pieces were in place. Now everything depended on perfect timing, flawless execution, and the courage of a 99-year-old veteran making one last stand for his town, his son, and everything he'd spent a lifetime protecting. The endgame was about to begin. Execute. Thomas's command triggered a sequence that would be talked about in Cedar Grove for generations. Chen's fingers flew across her keyboard, initiating the precisely timed detonation sequence Harold had set. The charges went off in perfect order. Main power, backups, emergency systems. Inside the bunker complex, darkness fell for 2 critical seconds before red emergency lights flickered on. But those 2 seconds changed everything. The massive blast doors slid open, their electromagnetic locks failing exactly as planned. All teams move, Thomas ordered. The trapped federal agents surged forward, fighting through radiation sickness, pushing past Kovach's surprised security forces. Rodriguez's team breached the main control room while Sullivan's unit secured the weapon components. Dad, get out of there now, Thomas commanded. They'll have people sweeping the lower levels. Harold was already moving through the passage, his body protesting, but his military training taking over. Above him, he could hear chaos erupting. Gunfire, explosions, shouted orders as Kovach's carefully constructed operation began to unravel. Chen, status, Thomas called out. Radiation levels dropping in sealed sections, she reported. They're losing containment control, but sir, they're trying to activate something in the central lab. Through tactical feeds, they could see Kovach himself racing toward the lab, surrounded by heavily armed guards. The smooth facade was gone, replaced by desperate fury. You don't understand what you're doing, Kovach's voice crackled through their comms. This facility isn't just about weapons or power, it's about reshaping the entire global order. Rodriguez, cut him off, Thomas ordered. Sullivan, secure those weapon components. Harrison, bring in air support. I want this place surrounded. Harold emerged from the passage into Peterson's basement, just as Apache gunships roared overhead, their spotlights illuminating the night. The streets of Cedar Grove had become a war zone as night riders clashed with federal agents. Thomas, Harold said urgently, the structural weak point. If they try to activate those weapons... Already on it, Thomas replied. His tactical camera showed him leading a team toward the central lab. Chen, get me a direct line to Kovach. Channel open. It's over, Kovach, Thomas declared. Your security is broken, your weapons are being secured, and 3 states' worth of federal agents are surrounding this facility. Kovach's laugh was borderline hysterical. You think this ends here? Everything you've done, the raid, the power failure, all of it, was predicted. Planned for. A new alarm began blaring throughout the facility. Thermal sensors picking up massive power surge in the central lab, Chen reported. They're trying to trigger a chain reaction. If I can't have this facility, Kovach snarled, no one will. Cedar Grove can burn with it. That's when Harold Mitchell made his final move. While everyone focused on the central lab, he retrieved one last item from his tactical vest, a small detonator he'd kept hidden. Son, he said calmly, remember that structural weak point I told you about? The one that could bring down the whole facility? Dad, no. I placed one more charge, right at the critical stress point. It'll collapse the central lab, contain any explosion they try to trigger, but someone has to get close enough to detonate it manually. Thomas's voice was tight. Dad, please. I built this place, son. Only right that I'm the one to end it. Harold started moving. Chen, guide me in. One last mission. The next few minutes were a blur of action. Harold moved through the chaos like a ghost, decades of combat experience guiding his steps. Federal agents secured sections of the facility while Night Riders fought desperately or surrendered. He reached the outer lab area just as Kovac's men were initiating their doomsday sequence. Through the reinforced windows, he could see the weapon components glowing with that terrible blue light. Now, Chen. Harold pressed the detonator. The explosion was precisely calculated, focused. The lab floor collapsed inward, taking Kovac and his weapon with it into a concrete tomb, while the rest of the facility remained intact. Central lab contained, Chen reported. Radiation levels dropping, minimal leakage to surrounding areas. All teams report, Thomas commanded. Alpha team, all clear. Beta team, suspects in custody. Perimeter secured. By dawn, Cedar Grove had changed forever. The Night Riders were in custody, their leadership decimated. Federal teams had secured the weapons and evidence. And Harold Mitchell stood with his son, watching the sunrise from Ruby's coffee house. You could have died down there, Thomas said quietly. Could have died a lot of places, Harold replied. Iwo Jima, Korea, that hardware store basement. But that's not what matters. What matters is you survived. Again. Harold smiled. What matters is we protected our home. Together. Sarah brought them coffee, fresh brew, hot and strong. Outside, Cedar Grove was waking up to a new day, one without fear of midnight motorcycle engines or protection rackets. You know, Harold said, sipping his coffee, I think I've got one more war story to tell now. Thomas laughed. I think this one's already becoming a legend, Dad. The 99-year-old veteran who helped take down an international weapons cartel. Just doing what needed doing, Harold said modestly. But his eyes sparkled with well-earned pride as he watched federal agents helping rebuild the town he'd spent a lifetime protecting. The sun climbed higher, marking the beginning of a new chapter in Cedar Grove's history. And at his usual table in Ruby's coffee house, Harold Mitchell, veteran, father, hero, smiled and opened the morning paper, ready for whatever adventure came next. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.